Welcome back. Earlier in this chapter, we looked at how uncertainty and incomplete information can lead to a breakdown in negotiations. And now we're going to see this in a different mechanism. We're going to see it in what's called a commitment problem. So far, throughout our course, we've looked at contracts which are enforceable. That is, if you propose me some sort of deal and I say yes, then that deal is signed and it's implemented. And neither one of us is going to break the terms of that contract. And this is a very plausible assumption to think about in most cases because we have courts, right? And so if you were to violate a contract, I could take you to court and that would be really bad for you. And in fact, it'd be so bad for you that it deters you from breaking the deal in the first place. So in that sense, these contracts are readily enforceable and whatever we agree to is what's going to happen. However, while that is the case most of the time, it's not always the case. And there are a lot of interesting situations where these sorts of enforceable contracts are not existent. So you can think about this in terms of a black market dealing. If you and I are working on the black market and you do something that I don't like, I can't then go say to the authorities, hey, my friend over here, he did something bad to him, go arrest him. Because if I were to do that, then the police officer would arrest me as well, right? So black market deals can't use an outside party to enforce them. If there are dirty cops out there, then we're in trouble for a different reason. Now the cops just don't care about us, and so I can't go to them because they'll just laugh at me. Again, another situation where there isn't any sort of enforceable agreement from a third party. In a more petty situation, you can think about home improvement deals where you hire a contractor to do some work in your house, and he slacks off on the job toward the end, and he doesn't actually complete exactly what he was supposed to do and what you paid him to do. It's kind of difficult to then sue him or take him to court over this because the amount of time and effort to do that isn't worth it for you ultimately. And so you can kind of get away with that. Lastly, in international relations, you can think about situations where perhaps the United States signs some sort of international agreement and then the United States breaks the international agreement. There is no world police force that can come and arrest the president of the United States and put him on trial somewhere else. So in that sense, there is no sort of third-party enforcement. The United Nations just isn't that powerful. Each and every single country is in charge of themselves, and it's up to the other countries. If they really want to do something, they're going to have to use military power if the other side isn't going to give it up to them readily. So again, these agreements aren't third-party enforced. You need to enforce them yourself if they're going to be enforced at all. All right, so what happens when we're in those sorts of situations? Well, one thing that can happen is a commitment problem, and it's going to be bad. And to illustrate this, I want to look at Breaking Bad. So if you've never seen that series, that's fine. It's a great series. You should check it out. But we have a quick little primer here for the uninformed. So the story of Breaking Bad is a nice guy, high school chemistry teacher named Mr. White gets cancer. And he's got a wife, he's got a son, and he's got another child on the way. And he realizes that after he's gone, these guys aren't going to have enough money to get by, so he needs to make as much money as possible as quickly as possible, and so he decides to be a meth cook, because that's going to get him a lot of money fast. And a lot of the first 2 seasons of this series is dedicated to showing how Mr. White really doesn't understand how the criminal underworld works, and he learns that life isn't so easy without these third-party enforced contracts. So a recurring theme over that time is that a bad guy asks Mr. White to make an investment in some sort of meth operation where he's going to cook and then someone else is going to distribute. And because this is meth and because meth is very valuable, the investment Mr. White has to put in, those hours of labor and the materials necessary to make the product, the investment is going to pay back a whole lot for not only Mr. White, but also enough to pay the bad guy to do the sorts of deals that he needs to actually sell the product. So there's going to be a lot of money coming in, and it's going to be good for both parties. And Mr. White readily accepts these agreements and then ultimately pays the price. And to see why, let's look at this as a simple 2-move situation. So Mr. White can either invest in the agreement or quit while he's ahead. And if he invests in the agreement, the bad guy can either share the profits or be bad and essentially take all the money for himself. Remember that the higher payoffs are the better outcomes for each of these guys. So Mr. White most prefers the outcome where he makes the investment and the bad guy shares. That's going to be profitable for Mr. White. And he least prefers the outcome where he invests and the bad guy takes everything. In other words, Mr. White only wants to invest if the bad guy is going to share. Otherwise, he would prefer to quit. The bad guy, meanwhile, most prefers being bad and taking all the money for himself, then prefers getting some money by sharing, and then least prefers the outcome where Mr. White just quits because then the bad guy doesn't receive anything whatsoever. And if we work our way backward here, we'll see that there's going to be a problem with Mr. White investing. So if Mr. White invests, the bad guy has a choice between sharing or being bad. Being bad gives the bad guy more money. That's taking all of the money for himself. So the bad guy is going to be bad in this sort of situation. And then working your way back up, if we eliminate that share situation, we see that the choice for Mr. White is to invest and have the bad guy be bad, or for Mr. White to quit, in which case he gets 2. Since this middle outcome of quitting while he's ahead is better than being manipulated by the bad guy, he should quit while he's ahead. And so the outcome, if Mr. White is actually playing strategically and thinking about this world with an unenforceable contract, then he should just quit. And that should be the outcome of the game. However, what happens is the bad guy successfully tricks Mr. White a lot of the time in the series, at least to start, because what the bad guy says, and what he's saying here is going to be true, is that, look, Mr. White, if you invest in me, if we get this deal going, there is enough for us to go around so both of us profit here. Think about what happens if you just stop. If you just stop, both of us are worse off. And that's true if we look at this game tree. Look at the payoffs for if Mr. White invests and the bad guy shares. Mr. White gets his best outcome, he gets a 3. He only gets a 2, his middle outcome, if he quits while he's ahead. So it's better for Mr. White to have that outcome occur. And it's also better for the bad guy to have that outcome occur because the bad guy makes some sort of profit, whereas he doesn't get any profit at all if Mr. White quits. So the bad guy is going to be pushing Mr. White, saying, look, it's better for both of us if you do this. You really should invest like this. It will be better for both of us. The problem here is the bad guy's inability to actually credibly commit to sharing once Mr. White has invested. So a commitment problem is simply when there's an inability to commit to cooperative behavior in the future, and that sabotages productive investment today. So for Mr. White, that's investing in making the drugs, and for the drug dealer, the cooperative behavior is to share the profits afterward. With enforceable contracts, commitment problems go away. Why is that? Well, think about this. We could just sign an agreement. The bad guy, Mr. White, could sign an agreement where Mr. White invests and then the bad guy shares according to some sort of profit distribution, which they've previously agreed on. And then if any one of those guys violates the contract, then we can go to court and work our way out there. You can't do this in a black market setting, as I said earlier, because then both of you get arrested. And so as a result, despite the fact that there's some sort of negotiated agreement that's better for both parties, we see that Mr. White should just quit while he's ahead. And that's bad for both parties. So, all right, we are in a situation where the lack of third-party enforcement is bad. How do we create contracts, or how do we structure contracts that are going to be self-enforcing? In other words, how can we create contracts that we don't need a third party to enforce for them to work out? And that's what we're going to be looking at for the rest of this chapter. So I'll see you in those sections. Take care.